Well, everybody knows the Zimbabwean voice now, so that's for sure. And it's a beautiful voice, that one. One of unity, one of togetherness, one of peace, one of love, you know. That's the way forward. Oga, Oga.
Dalumuzi, thank you so much for the time and for agreeing to, chat with me. I thought, as I was saying to you before, it would be good to share that on your story, specifically because, sometimes people from our community want to do great things, but sometimes they don't know stories about how to do them, or how they sometimes, they want. It's important to understand how the thought process goes in towards, becoming, if I can call it that. So I appreciate you taking the time, and how you doing? How are things going on your side? Mm-hmm.
Cool, great. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. I really appreciate it, and very much looking forward to the conversation. It's a Sunday evening, and yeah, doing good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And where are you in the world right now? Just so everyone who's listening has a bit of context to that. Mm-hmm.
Great. Funny, I'm in the office on a Sunday evening in Johannesburg. It's been a full working weekend, and getting ready for the week ahead.
Good, terrifically. So, and for context for everyone that's listening, where are you? So, what do you do right now? I know you've done a bunch of crazy different things, but what do you do right now? Just so that everyone has a little bit of color to that.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to share. So, about 2 years ago, I founded a startup called Notto. It's an alternative credit scoring platform, and our initial focus is, doing specialized credit scoring for home loans in the South African market. And Notto actually comes from the word umnotho or inotho in Ndebele, which means wealth, and that really speaks to the mission of the company, which is to help people build wealth by giving them access to very good, affordable credit that enables them to own assets and build wealth.
Okay, amazing. And why real estate? Of course, I think wealth is important. I think everyone, so a lot of the reason why people wake up in the mornings, of course, is to chase it. But why housing as a tool to, of course, choose where you want to apply your energy and effort?
Sure. I think for me, it's brought together quite a lot in terms of consumer preference. Generally in terms of what kind of assets consumers like to own, and then also in terms of the kind of data that we collect. So from a consumer perspective, there's two aspects to it. One is the reality that for most people, the majority of their wealth is in the residential property that they own. So if it's just calculated the net worth of most people, particularly middle class, the majority of their wealth is in the property that they own. So that's just like one reality in terms of where a lot of people's wealth is tied. The second is that a home means a lot to a lot of people. So the home is not just a physical structure that provides shelter. Right. It has a lot of meaning imbued in it, right? A sense of stability, a sense of security, a sense of achievement, even a sense of dignity, right? So if you take those two to say, practically speaking, if you run the numbers, a lot of people's wealth, the home that they own, and then you take what a home means to people, this is a really great place to start in terms of helping people to build wealth, because people they have a visceral need to own a home, and they are willing to move mountains when they know that a home is within reach. And then the other aspect from sort of like internally, the kind of data that we collect to build credit scores and determine whether somebody can afford to repay a home loan or not is, data such as rent payment data, utilities
Right.
payment, school fees, how well people save, and looking at those data points. That we track, it made sense to start with home loans because just as one example, in many cases, what people pay as rent, they actually can afford to pay as a mortgage if the mortgage repayment is the same as their rent. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what it is, which is a lot of people's wealth is in the home that they own. Homes mean a lot to people. And then, the kind of data that we track, makes scoring for home loans a very nice place to start.
Okay, that's exciting. To take maybe a step, maybe a little bit further. So when when you're looking at this opportunity as something that you wanted to apply yourself, did you find that right now, by and large, people aren't being served in that capacity? Maybe they're paying a lot of rent, but not many people are owning their homes. Is that something that you kind of identified as a big problem? And if so, how big of a problem is it really?
Great question. It's a massive problem. And I'll just give an example of what the experience of getting to own a home in Zimbabwe looks like and how it has changed over the years. So both my parents, I grew up in Bulawayo, and both my parents were teachers. My dad was a science teacher. My mom was a home economics teacher, so fashion and fabrics, food and nutrition. And they both taught at government schools.
Right.
In 1981, they bought a home in Newton West, which is like, a middle class type neighborhood. They got a mortgage, and using their salaries, their combined salaries as teachers, they were able to pay it off basically in 15 years, right? Now,
Wow.
if you take two teachers now in Zimbabwe, it's tough for them to achieve that. And most people now aren't owning through accessing a mortgage. And that's a reality across the African continent, with the exception of South Africa, actually, where we're operating. A lot of people, how they will get to own their house is that they literally will build it brick by brick over plus minus 10 years, right? So they'll first get a stand, and then after getting a stand, they'll sort of like do the planning. They'll get an architect to do the planning. The plan will be approved by city council. And then as and when they get money is when they will build. So when they've got enough money to dig a foundation and put a slab, they'll do that. They'll run out of money. Meanwhile, by the way, when they're buying this stand and digging the foundation and then eventually putting up the wall, the roof, the door frames, windows, etc., they are renting, right? So it's like a double whammy. You are paying your $200, $300 rent, maybe $500 if you've got lots of money in the current context. But at the same time, you're saving towards building your own home.
Correct.
And this is how big the problem is. Like, how many people do you know, one, who are renting and are consistently paying their rent in full and on time for many years, right? And then two, how many people do you know who are renting and are building at the same time? And if you combine those two, that is the size of the opportunity. And then from a credit scoring perspective, only 10% of African adults have a credit score. And if only 10% of 10%. And if only 10% of adults have got a credit score, it means that only 10% of adults can access, meaningful, formal credit, such as home loans. So, and the reality is you cannot unlock home loans for people to finish building their houses or to start building their houses or to build a home unless they have a credit score. Because banks are not about to take a risk on a consumer whose risk profile they don't understand. So at the risk of drinking my own Kool-Aid, literally credit scoring lies at the very core and heart of financial systems and of credit. And you cannot unlock opportunities. You can't solve this problem unless you first sort out credit scoring.
Right. So you actually, it's a data company, of course, that then unlocks you. Maybe houses become the first opportunity, but you could do insurance, or you could do cars, or you could do, you see, but the house becomes the most tangible place to get rental data. Okay. Okay, so but my next question was to be like, how big do you want to take it? But I'm like, no, I can already see how big it could already be.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's exciting, and then of course, I've glimpsed into your life as particular parts of that journey, and it's been inspiring to see how far you guys have come. But maybe
Yeah.
just to take it a little bit back, so everyone has a little bit of context around how we even got to be at a place where we can make such big moves on the continent. You mentioned that you were born in Bulawayo. Maybe touch on that. What was your upbringing like? Just so we have a bit of context for that.
Great, sure. Very happy to. So I was born in Bulawayo, 1989, so I'm 32. Well, turning 33 literally in a few weeks. But I like the idea of being 32 for the rest of my life. Right. So yeah, I went to primary school. Like when I was in Zim, I just went to government school. So I went to primary school, one called Greenfield.
Right.
And then after that, I went to Mzingwane. Some people know Mzingwane, but some people don't. And for those who don't, I say it's next to Falcon, and then they're like, okay. So it's this random school next to Falcon.
It's like they're by Falcon. They say, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, so I did my O's there. Did reasonably well. Won a scholarship to go to a private international school called Waterford Gamhlaba in Swaziland. And absolutely enjoyed it. Best 2 years of my life.
I'm gonna pause you there. I'm gonna pause you there, because I think the last time I saw you, you told me a very interesting story about how even going to Waterford even came about. There was a kind of a few stories that I found were very powerful. So maybe touch on how the transition from Zingwane to Waterford even happened, and just so people have a little bit of can live through that experience.
Yeah. So I wrote my O's in 2005, and to be honest, my teenage was a very tough teenagehood. So only my dad was working at the time, and he worked at NAST, and he was basically a sole breadwinner. But he had four kids. My parents had 4 kids in school at the time. My 2 older sisters were in university. I was in boarding school. My little sister was in boarding school. And as you can imagine, he had extended family to support. And you add that the Zim crisis we were in the middle
of, course,
at the time. So it was a lot. So at the time, the fashion was like baggy jeans, baggy t-shirts, straight caps.
Right.
I remember the gadgets that used to come up. What did we start with? I remember in primary school, with grade 7, we still had Walkmans with cassettes, and then Form 1, Form 2, there was a Discman that came through. Then after that, it was the MP3 players, and then and the reason I mentioned this is because the kids who I used to play with in primary school, would be busy running around chasing tires and wheelbarrows, etc. When we became teenagers, things changed, right? Some people were wearing really fancy stuff. They had Discman and MP3 players, and they had those phones with polyphonic tones, right?
Polyphonic, right, of course.
Yeah, I didn't even have a 3310 or anything of the sort. They would leave the hood, looking all cool, and go. They were the ones who were always lucky with the girls. Not that anything was happening.
Not that. So you're saying, were you watching just were you saying must be nice? This whole must be nice to have.
Exactly, must be nice. In another lifetime, this could be me. And they would go to, everybody at the time used to either go to Bulawayo Center or to Harden and Sly.
Mm.
And go chill there. There was this candy shop, and actually, there was a phone shop at the corner, which was like right opposite, like the city hall.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where all the cool kids used to go and hang out. And because of my family situation, I wasn't a cool kid. And the reason I say all of this is that I just wanted to get out of the country, right?
Right.
Put myself out of this misery. So I did well in O level, and then one day I literally walked into our lower sixth class, and on the notice board of the class, there was an invitation for students to apply for the scholarships, and the scholarship was for study in like the US, Canada, the UK, Singapore, Costa Rica, and Swaziland.
Right.
So you would imagine, of course, I didn't want to go to Swaziland because everybody would be sort of like jumping on a plane to a very exotic part of the world.
Right.
But, eventually, I applied. The response came, and I'd been admitted, or I'd been offered the scholarship to go to Swaziland, and my parents initially were like, "Nah, you're already like because Swaziland was opening in January, and by then I would have been done with law, and I'd practically be left with like 6 months of A level before we started writing either in June or November." But somehow I convinced them to be like, what, let's give this a shot. And they let me go to Harare for this meetup with other people who'd won the scholarship that year and previously. And it turned out to be like, a pretty good deal. And so my parents eventually were like, okay, cool, it's fine. You can go to Swaziland. So that's how
you got there. And
yeah, I was desperate to leave the country because I didn't have nice clothes to wear.
Well, look, I think it does seem like it was kind of like the first big. It was a very transformative experience from what I gather. I don't know, United World Colleges, as you mentioned, have schools around the world, and they produce brilliant students. I think when I was doing my research, I don't know if was it Nelson Mandela's children, if I'm not mistaken, or one of them at least went to UWC.
So Mandela's kids went there. Archbishop Tutu's kids went there. So and then from the Mozambican side, not Samora Machal's, but there's a guy called Mondlane, etc. But the liberation struggle kids basically went to that school.
Right, and I think environment is very powerful. What did that school do to you from opening a worldview perspective? What did that do? What was that experience like being at UWC? How did your worldview change from that point onwards?
Yeah. So how I always say, when I was in Mzingwane, it was a boys-only school. And it was a boys-only school with really majority students from Bulawayo, a few from Gwanda, but mostly from Bulawayo, mostly Christian. I don't think there's anybody who didn't identify as Christian, even though they might have mixed with sort of like a more traditional religion, but they still people identified as Christian. Black as well. So mostly black, with a few mixed / colored students, but literally I could count them on one hand. Mostly Ndebele. My point is, and there were 600 of us. My point is, it was such a homogeneous, setup. Basically, it was like one kid multiplied 600 times. Same profile. We were just the same person. And then I went to Waterford, and there were girls. Really sort of like. I still did well. I was focused.
You weren't distracted. You didn't get too distracted.
Yeah. So, there were girls, literally people from all over the world. My first roommate was a guy from the Netherlands. I had a very good friend from Bangladesh, from, Zambia, Kenya, Tanzania, the US, the UK. Literally, there were kids from like 55 different nationalities at the school. I met my first atheist at the school.
Wow.
I never really interacted with Muslims.
Right.
And so it was such an incredibly diverse school that it literally was a microcosm of the world. And the
Yeah.
school was, it just like allowed us to flourish. I started student organizations. I ran for student government. They didn't have head boys and prefects. Instead, they actually had an
Head boy.
SRC. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So ran for that, and I was secretary treasurer, which was like the second, sort of like I was a 2IC to the president of the SRC. It's kind of like a vice president. So like, I just got there, and it took me a bit of time to find my feet, and to feel like I belong. But when I did, then I was able to thrive.
And you mentioned, I think when I was doing my research, or we spoke earlier, you spoke about, I don't know, I think being in this new country. Sometimes when you go into a new country, you're like, well, I've come this far already. Let me then explore different things and see how far I can take them. I think you said you'd write. Would you write to the local newspaper and then started actually publishing stories to the paper? Maybe tell us about that. I think you did. That was something that you were doing on your.
Yeah. When I went to Waterford, I remember actually. It's funny enough, I was talking to a student from the school earlier this week, and I remember I had a biology teacher when I was at Mzingwane. And for better or worse, her advice to me when I was about to leave was never go to a place and not stand out. Basically, that's what she said. Like, you need to leave your stamp in some way. When you get to a new place, you can't just be like a painting on the wall, or like, you have to make your mark. So when I went to Waterford, I asked myself, how am I going to make my mark? In fact, I actually started to ask myself that question before I got to Waterford. I guess I've always been an intentional dude. And when I got there, I started a student organization. It was called the Inspiration Club. And the idea was to just inspire each other as kids. We did some cool stuff. And then we then set up a community service student organization called Careers Support Initiative.
Right.
And to this day, it is the largest careers fair for high school students in the country. And it's been running straight since 2008 for basically almost 15 years. And during the pandemic years, it didn't stop running. They did it virtually. And literally, I mean, like, one day I hope I can. I've forgotten where these things are, but like, I literally wrote the business plan, as it were, if you want to call it that, for this thing. And 15 years later, I'm not in the picture. I'm not. I have nothing to do with it anymore. But it's still running. So that was very cool. It's probably the coolest thing that I did when I was at the school.
The Inspiration Club. Yeah.
And then the Career Support Initiative. And then what you were talking about with the writing, I always wanted to write. I always enjoyed writing. And I literally showed up at the two newspapers, the Times of Swaziland and the Swazi Observer. Well, the names have changed now because it's Times of Eswatini, but I think it's still Swazi Observer. And just like literally set up meetings with the editors and was like, I would like to write for you. Times of Swaziland, I first wanted to write, I asked to write for free. So I had a column every Sunday. The name of the column was Reality Check with Dalumuzi. So I just like wrote a whole, I have to pull those up as well. Because you're taking me down memory lane. And then I wrote for the Times of Swaziland for 8 months. And then I wrote for the Swazi Observer for another 8 months. And my first paycheck actually was from writing for the Swazi Observer. And yeah.
That's huge. Okay, so you've gone to Waterford, you've had all of these cool experiences, you've literally met the world, if I can call it that, right? At your doorstep. It must be, and it's extremely riveting. Then you're also writing on the side. Now, eventually getting paid for that, starting clubs, Inspiration Club, and career. You said it's career support initiative. These are all great things. And I think you left your mark, which was amazing. From there, what was the next? What was the thinking for the next step? It's like, okay, we all have that moment where we finish high school, and then we have to then decide, okay, how do we reorientate where we want to go? And what was that step like for you?
Sure. So I mean, like, I had to go to uni, and Waterford was actually a very good school to prepare me for going to uni abroad. I applied to universities abroad, and I don't usually say this, but since you're getting stuff out of me, I will say I applied to 12 universities, and I applied
Wow.
to 5 universities in the UK.
Okay.
And I can list them. I think I can list them: Cambridge,
Right.
King's College London, the University of Warwick. I think London School of Economics,
Right.
and the fifth one. I've forgotten the fifth one. But I applied to those 5 and I got admitted to all 5. And then in the US, I applied to 6. So I applied to Harvard, Princeton, Brown, Amherst College, Skidmore College, and a 6th one. I forget what the 6th one was. And then in Canada, I applied to the University of British Columbia.
Right.
And I guess at that time, literally, Waterford, those were the 2 best years of my life. And I'm always yearning to go back to those 2 years because I was a bit of a beast.
You're cooking. You're cooking.
So I actually got admitted to all 12 universities, and I got scholarships from all 12 universities. So
you
I
had your choice to say, where do I want to take my time?
Exactly. I felt this is so unfair. Literally, I was choosing between Harvard, Princeton, Cambridge, And I remember I had like scholarship package, so I was playing them against each other. So I was like, that one has given me FA for me to go back home every year. What are you guys gonna offer me? Like, how are you gonna match that? Like, give me something better.
Cambridge is offering this. What are you gonna do, Harvard, so you can measure?
Ultimately, I was choosing between Harvard and Cambridge, and I decided to go to Harvard.
Why? Is it because it's Harvard? Is it because it's Harvard, or was it like another?
I mean, like, yeah, it helped that it was Harvard, but then also I was really drawn to the liberal arts sort of education,
right?
Sort of like system, which is I still had time. So when I was admitted to Cambridge, I was admitted to study political science, social and political science. And I always knew at the time I really wanted to do social science because I was very interested in the development of Africa, and really understanding philosophically what it looks like to, develop the continent. And even at Harvard, like, I knew that's the path that I wanted to take. The Cambridge, I was just literally going to, from day one, just like focus on the one thing. But then with Harvard, I was still going to be able to have a little bit more of a broad experience. And they gave me more money. They were quite generous in terms of their scholarship package. So that's why.
Okay. For how can I put it? For a lot of people, sometimes when they go to what they call like a big institution, or when they're in a big room, it works out in one or two ways. One of the ways in which it works out is imposter syndrome, where you're like, geez, okay, I was in Blawaii just yesterday. What is going on? I'm literally in Massachusetts here. What is happening? This feels bigger than me. Or it works the other way, where it's like, no, I've come this far. Let me take it even further. Were you in any of those 2 boats, or or neither? When you're
Funny, I was in both. Seriously, I was in both. Let me explain. part of why I say Waterford was the 2 best years of my life so far was because I had no labels, right? I had no like if you say sure Waterford is a big deal, but it's in the grand scheme of things, like not a lot of people know about Waterford. It's an amazing school. Don't get me wrong, but you don't feel the weight to sound smart because you go to Waterford. You're still a kid, right? So that's why I was able, like the articles that I used to write, I used to put them together. I'm not kidding. I would type up, because they had to be 700. I would type up 700 to 800 words in 30 minutes and read for typos and then send it. Right?
And ship it. Then send it.
Like I was just like, just get it out there, get it done. Like, you want to start a student organization, do it. Like, literally I just threw myself at it. When I go to Harvard, now I had this label, right? So I actually became a lot more guarded after Harvard, because now it's like, dude, you better sound smart.
Let's see. Let's see all the Harvard.
And like people were like, how did this guy get into Harvard? You know what I mean? But like, I actually found writing to be a lot more difficult, right? Because I like, you better sound smart, right? So there was this burden, and then we'll talk more about the fact that afterwards I went to Oxford, right? So actually, the more labels I got, the more difficult it became, for me to really be truly myself. And of course, I've worked through it, and it's a constant work in progress. But then, but like answering more directly, it was a very weird kind of imposter syndrome, which is, am I good enough to live up to the labels that I carry? Right?
Say that again. Say that again. Am I good enough to live? Say that one more time.
Am I good enough to live up to the labels that I carry? Right. It wasn't necessarily that I felt like, I felt really privileged. I felt like, wow, so many smart kids here. But then you very quickly figure out that they're all humble. You're all just figuring stuff out. Right. But like, having the label Harvard is a bit of a burden for a 19, 20-year-old. And a lot of people, like, it's literally, I was like, the imposter syndrome was like, am I good enough for me to live up to this name? Am I going to be that one student who got admitted to Harvard and is going to like make people question, like, but how? Like, what has happened to Harvard standards?
The standards back in my day, the standards were actually
back in my day, back in my day, we had to speak Latin in order for us to get admitted. Now they're just
like Harvard. No way, it's not like I get it.
So that's how the imposter syndrome showed up. And then, but at the same time, like, Harvard is an incredible place. Like, similarly, they really give the space for you to flourish. So as a freshman in my first year, I was already taking graduate level courses. And in fact, I took graduate level courses throughout college. And I even got to the point of being a teaching fellow for one of the graduate level courses. So literally, I was 22, and my youngest student, I think, was 30 or something of the sort. And my oldest student was like 58, thereabouts. And I would fail them. I took so much joy in failing them. Just kidding, I didn't. Right. But like, how many universities out there, even if, say, I went to Cambridge, how many universities out there would let an undergraduate student be a teaching fellow for a graduate level course? But that's what I did, and Harvard made that possible. I started a non-profit in Bulawayo that provided leadership and entrepreneurship training. It was called Leaders Today. It still has some programming going on. And literally the first 2 years, it was funded by Harvard. First year I got a $5,000 grant. Second year I got a $10,000 grant, and then that gave us, the bandwidth and the runway for us to prove that we could actually do stuff. And then we started to unlock more funding from.
I think, and on that, I think that there are two things I want to touch on. I think the first thing is there's this Zimbabwean trait to over-index. I don't know if it's when we get into like a big institution or when we get a chance, you could just tell like a person just really does more than what is required in that building. So, for example, you were at Harvard being a teacher fellow, but then you're also at the same time starting a non-profit back in Zim. So that's the first. I was like, of course, very Zimbabwe. Like I can tell when Zimbabweans are there because of the way they really over-index when they get there. I don't know why that is, but we'll come back to that later. But the second thing is, there's a person that's being abroad currently right now. How were you really intentional about drawing all the resources you had at Harvard towards being impactful back home in Zim? And the reason why I say that is because I think a lot of us live this reality where we are abroad or we will attend, foreign institutions that have gravitas in their own right, but to have the intent to be like, no, but when I'm there, Harvard is going to fund the first 2 years of my program. I'm going to use the resource that I'm having here to take it there. What inspired that? And were you really intentional about it, or were you just rolling? Or did you see someone who inspired you to say, you know what, that's how I should go about things?
No, I don't think I had a blueprint or like I had seen it done somewhere. I just had a real sense of responsibility, right? You recall, I got literally when I was deciding between which university to go to, I had 12 scholarships. Like, I wish I could cut myself up into 12, or I wish I could say there are 11 other really great people who you could, and I vouch for them, and please just give them this opportunity, right?
Right.
And I just felt like I was so privileged to have the opportunities that I had, that the least that I could do is be a conduit and have that benefit a lot more people. Because they couldn't come to Harvard, for one reason or the other. But at least I could share what I was learning and the resources that I had access to and the opportunities that I had with a lot more people. So in fact, for example, the nonprofit that I started, literally 80% of the curriculum that we taught to high school students was an adaptation of what I was learning at Harvard, right? I literally would just take course material, adapt it for the context, then share it with high school students in Zim, and we eventually were training literally 2,000 kids a term. Across 50 high schools in much north, much south, and Bulawayo and Midlands. And for me, really just came from a huge sense of responsibility, which is, I'm so privileged to be in this space. The least that I can do is for this to benefit a lot more people.
I love that. And I often feel the same way the whole time, where you feel, regardless of who you are in life, there are always certain things that you should geez, I'm lucky to have this, or I'm lucky to be here. But it's one thing to feel lucky to have it, but then it's another thing to, okay, well, how can I have numerous friends that do this. They get into it and just say, geez, this is great, but I wish so many more people had access to the information that I'm getting. So I think well done on doing that. It's incredible. But then, of course, I know if I look at your trajectory, you were doing a lot of, how can I put it? A lot of the work that you're doing was very geared towards teaching, NGO, the social side of things. How did you then pivot into say, okay, I think business is a place that I want to be impactful? I know you then transitioned to do your MBA in the UK. So maybe talk to us about what that thinking was when you're making that transition.
Yeah, there's a serious side to it, but there's also a lighter side to it, as it were.
Right.
When so after Harvard, I got I won another scholarship, the Rhodes Scholarship, and went to Oxford. My first master's program was a master's in African studies. So I continued with the social sciences when I got to Oxford. And I remember, because I was on the scholarship, I already needed, literally, by the end of the first term, I was already applying for the next program that I would do after the end of this one. And I remember I was so torn between continuing the social sciences and then switching into business. And business for me was, I've always known that I have like an entrepreneurial side to me. And the nonprofit is one example. Starting the career support initiative is another example. I enjoy solving problems and building institutions around that. And I was like, you know what? An MBA is going to give me even more tools for me to be effective at this. So, what I then I was torn between doing a PhD in anthropology, because that had actually been kind of my focus at Harvard. I mean, I did an interdisciplinary social science degree, but it was quite anthropology heavy. So either to do a PhD in anthropology or the MBA. So eventually I decided that I'm going to apply to the PhD in anthropology. And I'm like, there's a research question that I was really keen to research. So I was actually going to, in Bulawayo.
What was the question?
So in Bulawayo, there's Ospateleni, as they're called, or like the change money people, who change forex on the streets. And my research question was actually, these people made a ton of money in 2008. How did they do it? What is it about them that made them, like, literally, if you had a PhD in Zim in like 07, 08, like, you were suffering,
Meanwhile,
or like if you were corporate, whatever. But then there were these guys in the streets, these women. Actually, my focus was on the women, right? You had women changing money in the street, and I remember, there were these myths that they would buy a new house every month, they'd buy new cars every month. Every single day while they're waiting to change their money, they're eating chicken in, pizza in, right? And the rest of the country was suffering, right? So I was like, what is it about them that, like, but then of course things changed when dollarization happened, and then now, so I really just wanted to understand what I called at the time the politics of knowledge production, which is, for many of these people, literally, they maybe had like O level, maybe they didn't have 5 O's, but somehow they figured out how to thrive in a chaotic, or rather in a moment of crisis. And then all the PhDs we had and the MBAs we had did not prepare us for that kind of Zimbabwe. So I wanted to understand knowledge production, particularly in context of crisis. And what I mean by knowledge production, or what I meant by knowledge production at the time, was they had a particular way of seeing the world and showing up in the world that enabled them to thrive in a moment of crisis in a way that a PhD wasn't able to. I just wanted to understand that. I'm like, similarly, in a more stable environment, when things are, well, maybe the PhD and the MBA is going to thrive more than, somebody who's just like used to hustling in the streets. But I thought that was an important question, particularly in the context of informal economy, where there's so much informal economy, economic activity, taking place. Literally 70% of people on the African continent, are informally employed or employed in a small business, and I really believed it was important to understand that. But anyway, for PhD in anthropology, that's what I was going to focus on. I really was interested in that question, but then at the same time, I really genuinely did not want to write the GMAT. I was like, the last time I wrote standardized tests was like SATs, and I am done with that life. I am so done with that life. Like, I have to go back, whip out like this page.
I believe you. I
was like, no, guys, you know what? Let me just do a PhD. Well, I was like, okay, I'll do a PhD. I actually got admitted and everything. Everything was fine. Also I wanted to have the title of doctor. And actually I was going to be called I'm a Zimbabwean. Who doesn't
You're
want to be a doctor?
Zimbabwean. You're so Zimbabwean.
We all want to do PhDs and be Doctor One. So, and I was actually going to become Dr. Mhlanga or Dr. D, whatever. I was going to be a cool one. I would have been Dr. D. And I was literally going to have a PhD by the age of 28, 29, right?
Right.
Before I would turn 50, I would be like PhD. And I think I would have totally milked that. And
you would have run with that. You would have run with it.
yeah, exactly. I would still be running with it. Like, I would be like, do me, you don't address me in the first place.
It's like, please respect me.
I have to add the title. Yeah. So, and then after all this was all set, I was invited to a conference in Abu Dhabi. That would have been in March 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So I was invited to a conference in Abu Dhabi, was there for a week, had a wonderful time. The Emiratis have got tons of money. So,
Right.
we're living in a 5-star hotel literally for 10 days. And, eating really great food. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I think they paid me like a couple $100 a day of just like being there. And then on the Friday night, on the Friday afternoon, the day before we were leaving, we'd made very good friends with some of the Emiratis there. They're like, actually, you know what? Let's drive up to Dubai and we'll show you Dubai. We got to Dubai and I had in my life never, ever seen such incredible display of wealth.
It's in your face.
It was, I was like, honestly, like,
yeah.
They took us to like, we saw like those, those cop cars that like the Bugattis.
Yes.
Those cars a couple $1 million, and it's like it's like a cop car just because they can. And when we were leaving the airport, when I was going back to the UK, like they were selling, like those keep calm things.
So keep calm and what? Right.
In the exit when you're now leaving Dubai, and it's like they're trying to remind you, like So one of them was like, "Keep calm. We have oil for another 100 years."
Relax.
It's like, no, whatever you saw, it's not about to disappear. We still have oil for another 100 years, But what that did for me was, I hung out with Emiratis. They're smart people, they're great people, really good people. But I was like, you know what? At the risk of not being arrogant, realistically, I was like, I am smart. Like the Emiratis are smart. They're good at what they do, but I am at least as smart as they are. And really, how much wealth I create for others, and a little bit for myself, is a function of a decision. Literally. I just have to decide that, and I know this is coming from a place of privilege, right? It's not the case for everybody, or in some time even for most people. But literally, I was a decision away from choosing a path that would create a lot more wealth for others, right? And that decision was understanding business and doing business in a really solid, meaningful way. And I was like, you know what? If I am as smart as the Emirati in Dubai, and they're able to generate so much wealth, and I can do it too. It's within the realm of possible, within reach, right? There's nothing like it's like we're the same people, I just have to decide that this is where I would like to apply my intellect. And I'm a risk taker, so I'll always, take risks. And like, this is where I want to apply my intellect, my time, my energy, and my risk, my ability and my capacity to take risk. And literally on the plane, from Dubai to London, I wrote to the scholarship team and I was like, I'm not going to do the PhD in anthropology. I'm going to do the MBA. And trust me, I wrote the GMAT in 10 days. And
really?
I won't tell you what my score was, but I got into business school.
Look, I think that's a really powerful moment. I think having been to Dubai once, it often has mixed reviews. Some people say it's too flash, it's too much. But for me, what I talk about, when you go there, they show you photos of what looked like in 1994 or 92. And I couldn't believe, you'd be amazed at what human beings can do when they just apply themselves in a particular direction. I was blown away. I said, you guys just built this yesterday. It's insane. So I think I can imagine how that can inspire a person to pivot. And when you did pivot into like a business track, how was was the MBA as transformational as you hoped it would be? And how did it set you up for your next foray into the working world, quote unquote?
Sure. It was great. I mean, like when I went to do the MBA, I was doing the MBA with people who had been consultants at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, who had been investment bankers at Goldman Sachs and, all the top investment banks, who'd actually been working in business for 5 years. But because of the nature of my scholarship, I literally was going into the MBA with my only experience was starting and running a nonprofit part-time as a full-time, as a student. And I was under no illusion that I was starting from a low base compared to everybody else in my class. And my objective was to learn the language of business. Literally, for the whole year, I was like, I am new to this game. I am going to learn the language. I didn't know what EBITDA was when I started, literally.
It's all a language. It's all a language. It's all a language.
It is a language, right? And you need to know how to speak it. And it's not just about speaking, it's about how you think about things and how you approach them, etc. And I just wanted to immerse myself in that. And it was very, very helpful in that regard. I wouldn't have been able to transition to the business world in the way that I did without an MBA, no doubt about that. So yeah, it was great.
And so often so you've been blessed, right? And that's an amazing thing. We have had these terrific opportunities, but then now you said you have to sometimes live up to the institutions at which you have been frequenting. Now we have to go and work and then apply our intellect, energy, and passion at things that we believe to be important. What did you then do after that? So everyone knows, and how you jumped into that next step.
Sure. So I remember when I was doing the MBA, I was very fascinated by mobile money. I've always been.
Say that again. You were.
I was very fascinated by mobile money.
Right.
And I think actually, I think I'm a fairly consistent guy. I've really always been interested in impact, changing people's lives.
Yep.
And doing the best that I can to change people's lives. And I'm in perpetual pursuit and search for tools, the most effective tools that are available and that we can create to change people's lives. And so when I was on the MBA, I knew, but at the same time, I wanted to build a global network in the business world. So I knew I wanted to work in London. I knew I wanted to work for a telecoms company that had mobile money operations with a focus on Africa. So those are the 4 criteria for me. Be based in London, work for a telecoms company that has mobile money operations in Africa. And that would have ticked my boxes of being based in London, building a network there, but then also having a connection to the continent, and really working on a tool and a mechanism to impact people's lives positively. And there were only 3 companies that fit that criteria. It was Vodafone, because they own Safaricom and Vodacom. So Vodafone is headquartered in London. The Millicom as well had operations in Africa, so Tanzania, DRC, Chad, Ghana, and Econet. Actually, through their liquid office, so they're pretty solid liquid office. So I told myself I was going to get a job in one of those 3 companies. I applied to all of them. I got offers from all of them, and I decided to join Econet. When I joined Econet, I joined the mobile money part of the business, working with the sort of the the group CEO for the fintech slash mobile money business. In the first 3 months, I was actually deployed to Zim. So I was told that first 3 months you'll actually work from Zim, but I was based in London, had a London contract. And I worked with the CEO of EcoCash, Natalie, at the time. And we worked together for 3 months. And then I was due to move back to London and work with my boss who had hired me. And I remember on a Sunday, I'm not even kidding, I was chilling on a Sunday at home. And I get an email from my boss, and she's like, the chairman would like to meet in Joburg on Thursday. So you need to make your way to Joburg. And the chairman is Mr. Masiwa, Strive Masiwa. And I made my way to Joburg. Thursday we met. There were a few changes in sort of like the structure. And then on Friday at about 11 o'clock, I got an email from his PA saying the chairman wants to meet you. So I made my way to the chairman's office, walked in, and he was in a meeting with 4 execs. And when I walked in, he said, speaking to the execs, this is Dalumuzi, and he's joining my office from today. And that was it.
Yes, sir. You said yes.
So I had to, like, literally, I sat down, I started taking notes and, like, taking instructions, and that was the beginning of the rest of my life.
You said, by saying this, no, this is what's this is the call to adventure.
Yeah, literally, I walked out, and then his PA is like, "Yep, you need to go pack up your life in Harare and make your way back." And literally, I was just told the travel schedule for the next week, and then they're like, "You need to get a US visa, you need to get a Canada visa, you need to get this visa because you'll be traveling." And I worked as Strive Masiwa's chief of staff for the next 3.5 years.
Oof, huge. I'm trying to figure out how best to frame this, because of course you are every society, maybe ours, they're a small number of people, a lot of people look up to because of their influence, their impact, and what they've done for not just for our country but for the world, really. Mr. Travis Masiwa, of course, is one of those people. And you being chief of staff, you had the luxury, of course, being just in the room. So I know, of course, you can't go into detail around what that was like, the details about how that was. But what was it like from a learning perspective? Being in the room because I'm sure if you're that close, you must have met some of the most influential people in the world, seen how they think, and how they approach things. What was that experience like from a learning perspective?
First of all, I'm ridiculously, insanely grateful to my former boss. He legitimately is one of the most generous people I have ever met, and I often say I have never met anybody like him, and I truly mean it. I haven't. He was so generous, and I remember he would say to me, "Dalumuzi, when I go into a meeting room, and I want you to go, just follow me and get into the room." And he would say, "When they see you getting into the room, and I don't chase you, no one is going to chase you." Right? He's like, yeah, like people will be like, "Oh, there's a reason why this guy is in the room. We're discussing really serious issues, but Strive Masiwa is letting him sit, so we'll let him sit." So I can't think of many people who have got to the level that he has got, who are that generous with access to their space, and I give him a lot of credit for just what I'm building with Notto. I have no doubt in my mind that just like how I've approached solving the problem, building the company, fighting fires here and there. A lot really comes from having a front row seat at the incredible things that he did and pulled off.
They say sometimes when you get into such opportunities, what I've seen is it just broadens the scope of possibilities. Would you? I think that was one thing. Would you agree? That was a
I mean,
what is that's we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Like just being with
you
people
know,
doing things. You say, can we
I
do
have
that?
I have a line, and I think this is going to be my first quotable quote. And that line, I guess other people have said it in different ways, but the way I say it is, you only achieve what you consider to be possible. If something does not exist in the realm of possibility for you, it is impossible for you to achieve it. It's impossible, right? Um, and working directly and, having the opportunities that I had, exactly as you say, expanded my sense of possibility almost infinitely. And therefore now, like when I think about what is possible to achieve and to contribute, it's like a lot more than I think I ever could have thought possible without that opportunity.
You've just seen people really doing things on a macro scale and say, "Wow, we can." Someone that looks like me, comes from where I come from, we can do those things.
I'm like, we were joking, Shona, right? And like, chat, like literally exactly like you say, like, looks like me, speaks like me, and just like is on the world stage and just does incredibly brilliantly. I'm like, if you look at his Facebook page, sure, he's shut it down now, but how many? He's got 6 million odd followers. How many of those 6 million now think of possibility in a different way? And it's a challenge to everybody who has a sense of who is privileged and has got a lot more opportunity to cascade and share that expanded sense of possibility with others.
And then to bring it full circle now, it's one thing to now see what is possible, but it's another thing to go after it. To be exposed to greatness, whether that's through education, whether that's through people or global best practice, and then say, okay, I've been exposed to it, I've contributed to it, I've tinkered, applied my energy and thoughts there, but then to now go out on my own, what was the moment that made you feel confident enough to say, now's the time?
At some point you have to take the risk, and risk and faith are like two sides of the same coin. For you to take risk, you have to believe. And I think I left my job. I quit. I resigned when I was 30. And the year I turned 30, so much changed. I moved from London to Joburg. I got engaged. And I got my job. And in my mind, I had a window of opportunity to take risk. And if I didn't do it then, it would become increasingly difficult for me to make the leap. So at least the day I resigned, I wasn't yet engaged. I was single. I mean, like I was with my fiance, but no kids. My level of responsibility wasn't like ridiculous. So I could go off and start something, and if we're having a rough patch, I could just like call Dumi and say, could I please sleep on your couch this month?
I can start. If I fail, I can start again. I won't, what I mean? I can always.
But if you don't have a wife and kids, like you can't be making decisions like that.
Right.
So I still had the capacity to take risk in that sense, which is if things didn't work out well, there were options that I had. Second was I had good experience, went to good schools, pretty decent network, and I could leverage that to really focus on something. And I already had some vague idea of what I wanted to work on. And I was like, you know what? I've got this sort of like 3 to 5 year period between age 30 to 35 for me to give this my absolute best shot. And if I don't do it, when I turn 70, I will always be asking myself, what if I had quit my job and tried this out, right?
Mm. Mm.
And I would never know the answer because I didn't, take
Mm.
the risk. But then now I am living the answer to that question. Right? Like I actually did quit my job, and this is exactly how it turned out. And so,
Right.
however it turns out, I truly believe it's going to work. But however it turns out, I know what it has been to take a risk at the age of 30. So ultimately, really, it's about and to be honest, what I was doing in the years leading to me leaving my job and starting a company was I was building a safety net, as it were, which is if things don't work out, like I say, I truly believe they will. But
Mm-hmm.
in the off chance that they don't work out, I have a pretty, soft landing,
Mm-hmm.
as it were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if my worst case scenario is a well-paying corporate job somewhere in the world,
Right.
why wouldn't I take the risk, right? Because
Right.
worst case scenario, I'll be getting a fat paycheck at the end of the month. I hope.
Right.
And so I was like, you know what? Let me just go for it. And there is not a single day I regret
Mm.
making that decision and taking that risk.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Um, at the end of every interview, I always kind of touch on the main thesis or the theme of the podcast, which is we are all living these interesting, brilliant lives across the world, whether as young Zimbabweans, right? And I think I read a letter that you wrote. I think it was an angry letter to someone who was complaining that Econet doesn't hire Ndebele people. And at the end of that letter, you said something about it, which was very poignant, which was like, in conclusion, young people, we have a lot of work to do in figuring out how best we want to contribute to our community and help it move forward. From your perspective, even though we we can't always be in Zim as much as we would like to, I believe the work is never done, whether you're there or you're not. From your vantage point, what does shifting the Zimbabwean narrative for the better look like? Mm.
The way I like to think in time frames.
Mm. Mm.
I would imagine the average people of listening to a podcast are like late 20s, early 30s. Well, let's just call it
Yep.
2030.
Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm.
The way we complain and we say, oh, those guys, they came independence and,
Mm-hmm.
they messed up the country, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
Mm-hmm.
That's what generations after us are going to be saying about us, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have a view about us.
Mm-hmm.
We have 30 years
Mm-hmm.
to shift Zimbabwe's narrative in a fundamental way. It's kind of like what you're talking about Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
Dubai did it like literally 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
China did it in 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there isn't somebody who's just going to fall from the sky and change things for us in Zim, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if podcasts will still be available.
Available. Right.
Or I don't know how we'll be interacting 30 years from now. But it'll be very interesting to have a conversation 30 years from now. To be like, hey, so do me, Dalumuzi, what did you do? Right?
Right.
Because then our kids and grandkids at that time, either will be like, this is the generation that shifted the narrative, not just for Zimbabwe, but for the continent.
Mm.
Or they will be like, this is just a continuation of what we've had from one generation to the next. So literally now we are the people in the arena. There's nobody else that we should be looking up to, looking out for. Like literally, it's you and me. And the sooner we fully embrace that responsibility and act on that responsibility, the greater chances we have of building an amazing nation for posterity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. How do you feel about where we are going? Well, rather, let me not say that. Let me rephrase. Do you feel inspired to keep contributing to where we should go? Let me say that rather that way. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a matter of inspiration. I think it's more a matter of duty, because there's nobody else who's going to do it. It's like like in in my work, my work was difficult, and continues to be difficult. And the one thing that I know I have to do without fail, sometimes I have no idea how the day is going to end. Literally no idea. Right? But there's one thing that I have to do. I have to show up in the morning. Right? And we just need to keep showing up to the task every day. From a place of duty. So whether I'm feeling inspired or I'm feeling optimistic or I'm feeling positive or whatever, I just have to show up. Right? Show up and do what you need to do. And literally, so that's my stance. Sometimes I'm not inspired, actually. Right? Sometimes I'm feeling very gloomy and feeling, oh my God, like, where is this going? Where is our country going? Or where is my company going? Literally, I'd actually say, enough days I don't feel inspired, but I just have to show up and do what needs to be done. And then I think that's sort of like, that stance is what keeps me going.
Phenomenal. That's us. I'm going to leave it there. But what I'll end off is I'll say thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Sunday to talk about your story. Give us an insight to how you came to be where you are right now and where you want to go, and keep doing your thing. I know a lot of people are going to listen to this and feel proud and hopefully compelled to know that the work is never done, and that we need to show up in the morning and keep showing up in the morning. So thank you.
Great. No, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay, we're good.
Oga, pani no muka.